This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Coming up tonight, illegal immigrants bash a cop in New York City and get bail, and why Democrats think deporting them might be too controversial. Plus, Taylor Swift. Is she a secret agent for George Soros and the Democrats? Or have online conspiracy theorists lost the plot? Stephanie Hamill breaks it down with us in a bit. And what is happening here?
Alligator moats along the border to electrify the border fence and maybe even put some spikes, bomb northern Mexico with missiles.
Could this be the next Trump campaign ad? We'll find out. But first, confirmation, it would seem, that you, dear viewer, are not alone in your concerns about whether or not Joe Biden is fit to continue as president. If the video I'm about to show you is at all correct, it seems like a lot of people inside the White House have similar concerns, not just about Biden, but about Kamala Harris and who could replace both her and him. Investigative journalist James O'Keefe, known for his sting operations, recently went undercover in Washington, D.C. He had drinks with a guy named Charlie Krager, who turns out to be a cybersecurity analyst in the Biden White House. And he had some pretty interesting things to say about how nervous people inside the White House are about Joe Biden's faculties and his ability to do the job. Have a look at this snippet of the conversation O'Keefe secretly recorded about the concerns inside 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue about Biden's cognitive ability.
But with him, I know. He's got dementia.
Well, I don't think he has that clinically yet.
No, yeah.
But he's definitely slowing down.
My question is, are the people, like your colleagues or the White House or whatever, do they get it? Do they know that? You know?
I think that they probably do, but no one in modern history has ever said, like, we're not going to renominate the president for a second term. That just hasn't happened.
Do they know that he has those issues?
I think so.
But they're not willing to say it.
Shows it.
Now, of course, it's not true that no one has ever not run again, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But if what Charlie Krager here said is correct, inside the White House, there is just as much concern about what to do about Biden as there is outside the White House. Only the thing is, they don't know what to do about it. Oh, and also, they've got another problem. Kamala Harris.
Same thing with Kamala Harris, is she's not popular, but you can't remove the first black lady to be vice president from the goddamn presidential ticket. Like, what kind of message are you going to send to, like, all the African-American voters?
So that's the reason why they won't remove her.
That's what I think. How would you spin that? People would be like, what the f***? Like she's a woman and she's multiracial.
And it's not just identity politics that are a problem for the White House. It's also Kamala Harris and human resources.
Kamala is so unpopular. The New York Times did an article about how she hemorrhages black staff. She can't keep black staff. They quit on her en masse.
She hemorrhages black staff?
Yeah, there's a New York Times article about it. It went, like, people sent it around at the office and everyone was like, oh.
Like her.
And by the way, remember that rumor we discussed last week here about Michelle Obama stepping in to save the day? Well, Charlie Krager agrees with me. Not gonna happen.
I've had a meeting with Michelle Obama at one point when I was an intern, and someone asked her, will you ever run for office? And she said no, emphatically.
Really?
She said, I will never run for office. It does not interest me. I've seen how, like, she said it a lot more eloquently, of course, than I'm going to say it, but she was like, I've seen all the shit my husband has had to go through, and that does not interest me.
Now, I know what you're saying. This could be just one guy talking himself up. But nothing that he said sounded particularly unlikely either. I mean, if the White House didn't know Joe Biden had cognitive problems, they'd be blind. And there is something else here, though, that stuck with me. Not just the fact that this guy, Charlie Krager, was so willing to spill about Joe and Kamala and Michelle for what, a couple of glasses of wine somewhere? I mean, oh boy, how's your security clearance looking, mate? But also, there was the fact that this guy, who presumably went to good schools and all the rest and is part of the leadership class in America, was so ignorant. Did you catch that bit where our man said that a president has never not renominated for a second term, at least in modern history? Well, look, I don't want to make too big a deal about it, except that this sort of ignorance keeps displaying itself over and over again, underlining what I think is one of the most depressing facts about modern American politics these days. Namely, that the leadership class in the U.S. is practically illiterate. They have no deep knowledge of the fields they're working in, much less anything broader. Lyndon Johnson famously chose not to run again in 1968, hounded by the pressures of the Vietnam War and his own set of corruption scandals. It's not just Charlie Krager either. A few days ago, New York Times columnist Nick Kristof opened up a column about the threat of war between China and Taiwan with a little anecdote. Wrote Kristof, Michael Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is concerned enough about the risk of war between the United States and China that he is listening to the audiobook version of Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August, the classic history of how the major powers in 1914 stumbled into World War I. Now, here's the thing. The Guns of August is, for anyone who is into all things military, a classic book. John F. Kennedy famously made his staff read it during the Cuban Missile Crisis to avoid again a repeat of the catastrophe of World War I. Could someone really make it, I wonder, to the top of the Joint Chiefs of Staff without ever having been across this work or what it says? It boggles the mind. Ben Rhodes, the guy in the Obama administration who cut the original Iran deal, and hasn't that worked out well, said much of the press in the U.S. was no better. He said he could tell journalists anything because, quote, the average reporter we talked to is 27 years old, and their only reporting experience consists of being around political campaigns. That's a sea change. They literally know nothing. Now, I got to tell you, this is scary stuff because at a truly dangerous time, we're not getting our best out of our politicians in the U.S. or much of the press either. All of these people that are supposed to be covering them. And it's all well and good to make fun of Joe Biden's mental deficits, but the rot, I'm afraid, goes much deeper. Joining me now to discuss the big stories of the week is the Australian newspaper's Washington correspondent, Adam Creighton. Adam, thanks so much for joining us here on the U.S. Report tonight. Now, I want to talk about what's going on with Iran, where the risk of conflict seems to be stepping up with a lot of mixed signals, but ultimately the White House and the Pentagon indicating that there will be more retaliations for that drone strike, which killed 3 American soldiers in Jordan. What is the latest on this, and why is the White House telegraphing its strategic intentions so closely to the people it's supposed to be fighting?
Yes. Well, to be honest, James, there's not really a huge update from when Joe Biden himself said yes, that he had decided on what the response was going to be. Since that yes, which I think was a couple of days ago, the response hasn't actually happened yet. And the White House seems to be indicating that they're not going to strike Iran, the territory of Iran, and possibly not even any Iranian property. I mean, the Iranian government itself has made pretty clear to the US, I understand, that if the Biden administration does strike Iran, then Iran will retaliate and hit various US assets in the Middle East. Look, I think the US is in a very difficult position here because, you know, if it does too much, it could start a war in the region. But of course, if it doesn't do enough, then it could invite more of these attacks on its troops. And then, of course, the further difficulty is that the group that has claimed responsibility for the attack that killed those 3 Americans is not technically under control of Iran. I mean, it's a proxy. It's funded by Iran. So you could make the same argument. The US obviously funds a lot of countries, but is the US really responsible for the actions of those other countries? You could have an argument about that. So look, it's a difficult situation, and I assume that part of the delay is just because there's indecision in the White House and the Pentagon.
But what then, Adam, message does that send to Iran when you're continuing what's clearly the failed Obama administration policy of trying to balance Israel and Iran? Clearly, this is not going to be tenable in the long run, is it?
Yeah, look, the politics is really bad for the US. For the Democrats, of course, because there was the $6 billion issue a few 6 months or so ago, and of course that's really played into Republicans' hands. They've argued that this money has helped fuel various acts of Iranian terrorism, of course the October 7 attacks, and then now also the more recent attacks on US troops. And that may well be true. We don't exactly know, but certainly the whole issue has been a disaster for Democrats.
Indeed. Now, speaking of Democrats, I want to move on to Democrat squad member Ilhan Omar. Now, viewers of this show will know a lot about her sort of history, but now shocking video has emerged of her giving a speech to a group of Somali Americans, essentially pledging her loyalty to Somalia first and saying that she is actually basically an agent of that government, not the United States. Here's a tiny bit.
marka taas ka seexda reer Minnesota gabadhii Congress u dirsateen way idinka war haysaa sidaad idinka u dareemaysiin dantaas ay u dareemeen madaxweyne Xasan Sheekhna.
Now, for years, people have joked about her being the Democrat member for Somalia, but, I mean, seriously, this is a very bad look for her and the squad. Are the Democrats going to take any action against her, or is she remaining on the protected list?
Well, the Democrats have said that they won't, but certainly lots of Republicans have asked that she resign or that she be censured. I think there's a motion for vote next week, but I seriously doubt that it will succeed. I mean, it's extremely hard to remove members of Congress unless there's overwhelming majorities. Look, I mean, this is the problem with multiculturalism, which I think we've all seen around the world very clearly since October the 7th, that, you have people with a divided loyalties to other places. And, this is not just a problem in the US, it's a problem everywhere. I mean, to be slightly in her defense, there's a lot of argument over the translations. There's a problem that so few people can understand Somalian in the US and also in Australia. It's extremely hard to verify. And so they've had to get, special UN interpreters, and there's a number of interpretations. And she says that the one that's being used to smear her is wrong. So honestly, who knows? I've got zero ability with Somalian, so I don't know. But these things always become extremely political. One side jumps on the other all the time. So what she said, I think, was foolish, but it's quite possible it's been exaggerated too. Who knows?
Well, maybe we could agree that it's probably not the most foolish thing Ilhan Omar has ever said. Let's move over to the other side of the aisle here, to Donald Trump. More legal woes now. He's off the back of his loss in what I think was, frankly, a ludicrous defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll.
It is.
But beyond that, even though I think Trump's going to win the appeal on that, the damage is done. Meanwhile, where are things up to on some of these other cases? I want to get a bit of an update from you on this, Adam, because I feel like these things are going to keep dropping out over the weeks and months ahead as part of this broader attempt to stop Donald Trump from being the nominee, or being the president, I mean.
Yeah, well, certainly the other civil case in New York related to the valuation of Mar-a-Lago, the decision there, or at least the penalty there, was meant to be brought down on the 31st of January. And of course, that came and went, and we still don't have a penalty. So I don't know what's going on there, but that's meant to be $370 million. So, much larger than the $83 million from the Carroll case. I mean, in my view, both cases are just completely ridiculous and shocking. Very, very bad indictment on the US legal system. And he's going to appeal both of those. But I mean, as you suggested, it's a lot more complicated than that. They're just the two civil cases. Then you've got the 4 criminal cases, which are still yet to go to trial. You've got the 2 federal ones, the one on the documents and the one on January the 6th, if you like. And then there's the Georgia case, which is also broadly related to the election. And then finally, the hush money case, which is in New York. Now, rather than go through each of those individually, I think the main point is that it's looking more and more likely, because of the various appeals that the Trump side has gone through, including probably to the Supreme Court on whether the president is immune from prosecution. These trials are being pushed back and back and back, and it's looking more likely that they won't happen until after the presidential election in November. And of course, if that happens, and if Trump wins, then basically he can pardon himself from all of them. So I mean, that would be quite spectacular, but it is looking more and more like that. So yeah, I mean, 6 months ago, a few people would have said this, but the appeals process is taking a long time. I mean, for instance, on the question of whether the president is immune from prosecution, that is currently with the DC Court of Appeals. It's 3 judges, 2 Democrat, 1 Republican, and it's taking a lot longer for them to bring down their decision than people expected. And if it takes too many more weeks, then that kind of automatically pushes all of the cases, much, much further back in the year. So on the question of timing, I think the Trump team is winning.
That's absolutely fascinating, Adam. I'm going to have to leave it there, but we'll have you back soon here on the U.S. Report. Thank you so much for your time, Adam Creighton from The Australian. Now, joining me is former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and Senior Partner with Bondi Partners. Mick, thanks so much for being here. Want to start off with a bit of foreign affairs news. Secretary of State Tony Blinken has asked the State Department to conduct a review and present policy options on possible U.S. and international recognition of a Palestinian state after the war in Gaza. Mick, what's happening here? To me, this seems like you're just rewarding terrorism and bad behavior.
Well, there's a little bit of that, James. By the way, it's good to see you as always. There's a little bit of that, but also a lot of politics. As you and I have discussed before, Joe Biden has a Palestinian-American problem. There's not that many Palestinian-American voters in this country. There's about 1 million, but they're concentrated in the state of Michigan. And they've threatened publicly and privately to not vote for Joe Biden in the upcoming 2024 general election. If they withhold their support for President Biden, he could well lose Michigan, and that could cost him the entire election because, again, we elect presidents state by state and not nationwide. So you've seen this action today regarding a possible recognition of a Palestinian state. At the same time, it didn't get nearly as much news, but the administration also said that they are now going to seek to sanction any Israeli settlers who attack Palestinians along the boundaries. It's unclear as to whether or not we sanction Palestinians who attack Israelis. But again, it's just another sort of sop to the Palestinian American community that Joe Biden really, really needs to get reelected.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting you talk about this, Mick, because here in Australia, we have a very similar sort of question around our Labor government and, again, the funding or the support they get from Middle Eastern communities here that are in very much the same position that they are in Michigan. This has also a similar issue around the stopping of funding to UNRWA after revelations that some staff were involved in the October 7th attacks. Are the Republicans going to be able to get UNRWA defunded permanently, and is the White House going to fight to keep money going to this organization?
Yeah, there's certainly going to be a fight about this. There's no question. I don't think this is getting nearly enough attention internationally. I do some press in the UK, and they were surprised that we were even discussing this. But here's the situation. Republicans in the United States Congress have worried for years that various United Nations organizations are anti-Semitic, in many cases anti-Christian. I'm talking about UNRWA, talking about the refugee folks, the refugees organizations, and so forth. There's a history here. It just has now percolated up and is out in the open. And a lot of the Republicans are running around this town now going to say, look, we told you so. These folks have been bad from the very beginning. Keep in mind, the United Nations are the folks who put, I think, Saudi Arabia on the Human Rights Commission and Russia on the Human Rights Commission, countries that don't really respect the same human rights that we do here. So there's all sorts of attention now, again, on the United Nations and on our funding for that, because we are the largest funder of the United Nations. This is going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight, and it absolutely will get tied to the funding of the government, the larger funding of the government fight that we're going to have between now and the 1st of March.
Well, so then, Mick, talk me through this. Then, how much of a problem is it that the foreign policy of the greatest superpower in the world, the United States, is being driven by the electoral politics in a few communities in places like Michigan?
That's politics, right, James? I mean, that's the democratic process. I don't have a problem with that. I just hope everybody is transparent about it. I wish that Biden would come out and say, look, I want to do more for Israel, but I can't because my folks aren't backing me. Keep in mind, there was a protest in front of the White House by federal government workers yelling out "Genocide Joe." Samantha Power was just accosted at one of her presentations, as she's a member of the administration, about why she hasn't spoken out more against her own administration's positions on Israel. This is ripping the Democrat Party apart from the inside. And my guess is you'll see more steps like this between now and November, not fewer.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think that left flank of the Democrats has gone very anti-Israel in some fairly sinister ways, I'll be honest with you. But I want to talk more about just some of the polls that we're seeing out here, too. We're going to take a deeper look at the polls with John Zogby a little later in the show, but I wanted to ask you about this as well. Biden now has a 6-point lead over Trump, according to one national poll that says that women are breaking in the Democrats' direction, and that this gender gap has women backing Biden by 58 to 36%, so that's gone up 10 points from December. Men support Trump 53 to 42, which is mostly unchanged. Is there something breaking beneath the surface of the national polls that the Trump administration needs to be, or the Trump campaign, needs to be worried about?
Yes and no. I mean, we all knew since 2020 for sure that Donald Trump was going to be weak with well-educated, generally white, generally suburban women. That is a group he has struggled with. I saw that firsthand when I was working in the Midwest for him during the 2020 campaign. Here's why. So that would be why you say, yes, they need to do more here. The reason I don't think they're going to is that this is really not going to be an election about swaying people in the middle. This is going to be an election about making sure your base shows up. And what Donald Trump is counting on is that his MAGA base will show up and that will be enough people to get him back into the White House. He is not doing any outreach, James, to the middle. By the way, neither is Joe Biden. I mean, when Joe Biden comes out and says that they're thinking about recognizing the Palestinian state, that's not reaching out to the middle of this country. That's reaching out to a particular part of his base. So both of the campaigns, I think, have acknowledged that in a rare circumstance now, it's not going to be the middle that decides who the president is. It's going to be whether or not the Republicans can get their folks out or the Democrats can get their folks out. So I do not think you'll see Donald Trump changing his message at all in order to appeal to white, educated, suburban women.
Yeah, and, Australians should always remember America does not have compulsory voting, so staying home is a very big option if you don't like either candidate. Now, I want to talk about one other issue that's also, I think, got the real possibility to divide Democrats here. Shocking video emerged this week of the moment a mob of illegal immigrants bashed police near Times Square in New York City, and the suspects were released on bail, suggesting that it is now possible to come to the U.S. legally, bash cops, and get released. We're seeing some of that vision right there on your screen right now. This would seem to be very demoralizing to most Americans, and Republicans are calling for deportations. The Democratic New York governor, Kathy Hochul, has also suggested this, and yet Biden administration still seems to be quite weak on this border issue. Is this going to wind up being something that is going to separate some Democrats in big cities that are being affected by this sort of thing from the party?
James, in fact, as damaging as that video is, there's actually photographs out circulating tonight that purport to be one of those alleged perpetrators released on bail giving the middle finger to the photographers as he walked out of the prison. So it actually gets worse from a PR standpoint for the Democrats. Here's how it breaks down. Ordinarily, in this country, immigration is an issue that is simply used to sort of appeal to the Republican base. It's not a bipartisan issue. Hardcore Republicans care about immigration. Most Democrats and centrists do not. It is different now. You've got Democrat governors, you've got Democrat mayors complaining about the problem at the border. There are literally millions of people coming across each year. I'm not making that number up. I mean, it's more than 1 million people coming in on an annualized basis illegally, and that is now moving away from just the Republicans into more of a bipartisan issue. If immigration remains the top issue, and by the way, in many polls, it's now displaced inflation and the economy as the top issue on voters' minds. If that remains the same, you could be looking at a landslide for the Republicans because they are so much better on the border issue right now than the Democrats are.
Absolutely fascinating as always. Mick Mulvaney, thank you so much for your time. Now, quick break before we go and chat to Stephanie Hamill. But before that, Nancy Pelosi wants you to know that she is absolutely fed up with protesters outside her home screaming, demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. And look, to be honest, if I was Nancy, I would be too. So I guess Pelosi and I are pouring our Chardonnay from the same jug on this one. But check out her unhinged and frankly racist response to one protester who got up in her face in her driveway.
Ceasefire. The Democrats want the ceasefire.
Go back to China where you came from? Hey, has Nancy turned into the racist aunt the ABC and New York Times advice columns tell you how to deal with at Christmas? Stephanie Hamlin and the Taylor Swift conspiracy theory after the break. Welcome back to the program. In a moment, I'll be joined by Stephanie Hamlin to talk all things Taylor Swift. But first, I want to take you now to Chicago, which is one of the most violent cities in the U.S., where gunplay is so commonplace that last year there were at least 2,800 recorded shootings. Now, luckily, I guess, Chicagoans are mostly bad shots, and only 20% of those shootings turned into fatalities. And just as lucky, I guess, for Chicago, the city council is on the case. They've decided to vote for a ceasefire. Have a look at the jubilant crowd learning that their city would no longer be a shooting gallery.
So I will exercise my vote and my right, and I vote aye. Yeah!
The vote was after the state capitol was occupied, don't call it an insurrection, by the local chapter of Chickens for KFC. I mean, Western liberals for Hamas.
Biden, Biden, you can't hide. We're supporting genocide. Free Palestine.
Sorry, silly me. They weren't voting for a ceasefire in Chicago. They were voting for a ceasefire in Gaza. Look, I've been covering mayhem in Democrat-run American cities for years now. And at some point, I figured the left would hit bottom and grow up and decide to work through their daddy issues on a therapist's couch instead of at the ballot box. Silly me. Obviously, I was wrong. Chicago is a great example of what H.L. Mencken said about democracy being the system of government where the people get exactly what they want, and they get it good and hard. Well, joining me now is Media Research Center contributor Stephanie Hamlin to talk all things popular culture, and I want to start, Stephanie, with the Republicans and their obsession with Taylor Swift and some of the conspiracy theories that are going on that she's some sort of psyop for the Democrats, a psychological operation. There's a theory that her relationship with NFL player Travis Kelce is all an elaborate plan to get Joe Biden reelected. Walk me through this one.
Yeah, it is interesting. There are certainly people on conservative Twitter who think she's some sort of psyop. Clearly, there are a lot of conservatives, including me, who find her to be very annoying. I don't think she's a CIA plant, but the relationship is very much in our faces, right? Now football fans have to see her every time they do cutaways at the football game. She's constantly in the headlines, and I regret that we're even talking about her right now. But I don't think that the government has to get involved to get an endorsement, if you will, because she already endorsed Joe Biden back in 2020. She's been very political, and she has a huge following. So my question is, how much weight does a celebrity actually carry when it comes to endorsements for candidates? It could go either way. Obviously, if you're a candidate, you want as many endorsements and as much support as possible, especially if that person has millions and millions of followers and people who are willing to spend thousands of dollars to see them in person. But what we learned from 2016 is that even sometimes with all of the Hollywood celebrity endorsements, it doesn't mean you're actually going to win an election. If you remember, Hillary Clinton had some of the biggest endorsements from celebrities from Hollywood, like Beyonce and so on, yet that was not enough to get her over the finish line. So do I want to see a very political Taylor Swift this election season? No, thank you. Do I want to hear from Travis, who had that very lucrative deal with Pfizer? They call him Mr. Pfizer. No, I don't need to hear from athletes about what vaccines I should be getting. That is a conversation to be had with your doctors, not being told what to do from a football player. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, but I would say overall conservatives are just annoyed that we're having to see too much of Taylor Swift when a lot of us don't love her music. We're not Swifties.
Yeah, well, look, I'll be honest with you. Taylor Swift has never really been on my radar. I've never heard one of her songs, I don't think. I don't have daughters, so it's not in the house. But at the same time, I wonder, what you say about Hillary Clinton is absolutely correct. She had all these celebrity endorsements. Nobody cared. Maybe conservatives should just say, hey, look, nice girl's dating the football player. That looks conservative to me, and move on.
Yeah, well, what we see here is the media is really propping her up, and then you have to sit and ask, why are they propping up this celebrity so much? And it's because she supports the correct party. That is, she was a Biden supporter. She supports liberal causes. She's come out in favor of the pro-abortion cause. And so, if she was the other way, if she was supporting conservatives, we wouldn't be hearing about her. In fact, they would probably be villainizing her. And this is just based on other celebrities who've come out and had a different opinion. And what is so tired and old about Hollywood is that they all regurgitate the same talking points. None of them think for themselves. Nobody has an original opinion. So when the few that do come out and it is contrary to the overall what is accepted narrative, then they are completely villainized. And we've seen this over and over and over and over.
Well, Stephanie, as I always say, there's an awful lot of sameness when it comes to people who advocate diversity. But I'm glad you mentioned these double standards and also the abortion issue, because big story that I don't think has gotten anywhere near enough attention, the Biden Department of Justice, and we've talked a lot on this program about their double standards, has convicted 6 pro-life protesters who are now facing up to 11 years in prison. What did they do? Well, they prayed, sang some hymns, and held a peaceful demonstration outside an abortion clinic in 2021. Have a look at this nefarious activity.
Praise to the King of Kings, yes, you are my everything, and I will adore you.
Now, 11 years for that. And yet we see the treatment of, people who've done all sorts of things, from the Black Lives Matter riots and a lot of other things from the left, and nobody pays any attention to that from the Justice Department point of view. What's your reaction?
My reaction is that this is a tragedy. It's another example of the two-tier justice system in this country. It seems like if you are a Christian or you support the wrong party, the Republican Party, in their eyes, then you get the book thrown at you, legally speaking. We've seen the legal system abused over and over again. It's not my opinion. That is just the general consensus if you look and see what is going on. Now, Paul Vaughn, he is a father of 11. And he's facing years and years in prison. And apparently what he was convicted of was violating a federal law against blocking access to abortion clinics. Now, if you actually look through the footage, there's people passing by. Nobody's really blocking anything. But, this is what they found to be. So he could be facing many years behind bars. And as you pointed out, the hypocrisy that's going on here is that if you look at states like New York and California, where criminals are committing horrific crimes against people, rape, murders, assaults, brutal assaults, they get a slap on the wrist and they are set free. But then if you are a Christian and are protesting against abortion, which is one of the greatest atrocities of my lifetime, you are severely punished. So we will see what happens with this. More people should be speaking out. Clearly, they are trying to make an example of this man and send fear down the spines of other pro-life Americans.
And finally, speaking of double standards, too, this border issue just keeps getting to me here, and especially the way the media has been treating the immigration debate. There's a push on to impeach Biden Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas. Have a look at how the media has been dealing with this issue.
We're going to the latest now on House Republicans' push to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas over his handling of the southern border, despite no evidence of high crimes or misdemeanors.
Now, all of these people in the press, saying, oh, this is a nonsense thing. And yet, Mayorkas, he's been letting what, 10 million people come through since the Biden administration started. Talk us through how the media is trying to shape this debate.
Yeah, if you check out the MediaResearchCenter.com Newsbusters, the latest is they gathered how some in the mainstream media were reporting on this. This is NBC, CBS, and some of the other establishment networks, if you will. And they found that they are trying to downplay this immigration crisis. So if you take issue with DHS Secretary Mayorkas, then you're the problem. That it's not that there's a problem with the immigration crisis going on if you have a question about it. But as you pointed out, millions of people have poured through this border, and even people that have been found on the terrorist watch list. I mean, we don't know who's coming through, and they're really, we're just not equipped for it. It is a humanitarian crisis, and the sanctuary cities, so-called sanctuary cities that some of these migrants are being bused to are up in arms, and they're trying to put the blame back on Texas, who has shipped some of the migrants. They're blaming Texas. They don't want to go to the root cause here, which is the Biden White House. Things were very different when President Trump was in office. There were policies that were, helping stop this flow and flux of migrants, and also just following the laws that are already on the books. The United States of America, we are a sovereign nation. We have the right to defend our borders. Every country in this world defends their borders. So there's no reason that this should be happening. It almost seems like it's by design, by the way that the Biden administration looks the other way when it comes to what's going on at the border. Border Patrol agents are frustrated because they've been handcuffed from doing their jobs. And we often hear from the Border Patrol, people who come out and speak against what is happening. And they said they need more resources and tools and ability to do their jobs.
Stephanie, we're going to have to leave it there, but you're absolutely right. This migration issue is a humanitarian crisis, it's a security crisis, and it's a law enforcement crisis. Thank you so much for your time, and check out Stephanie's work at the Media Research Center website. Now, before we hit a break, it's early in campaign season, but I wanted to share this with you, and I reckon it's going to wind up being a Donald Trump campaign ad, even if the star is a Democrat. Specifically, California Representative Robert Garcia, who complained on Capitol Hill about all the ways Donald Trump wants to secure the border, but did just the opposite. Have a look.
I want to remind the public that Donald Trump and House Republicans also have their own ideas for the border. So let's review the majority's border ideas that they've actually presented. Here they are. Donald Trump actually has said that he wants to build alligator moats along the border. That's one of his incredible ideas. Another idea that Donald Trump has promoted is he actually wants to electrify the border fence and maybe even put some spikes on the border. That's another Donald Trump and MAGA majority border idea. Another idea, which I'm not sure how well it would go, is he wants to actually bomb northern Mexico with missiles. That's another Trump idea. And finally, I think one of the ones that I think is the most grotesque is suggestions that instead we should maybe just shoot migrants in the legs as they cross the border.
Whoa, hold up there. Alligators, fighter jets, electric fences, stop. I'm not a Democrat. I can only vote once. John Zogby with the latest on the U.S. election polls next. Welcome back to the program, and it's time to take a look at the latest polls now with one of our favorite pollsters, John Zogby. John, thanks for so much for coming on the U.S. Report. I want to ask you about some of the latest numbers out there. One thing I'm absolutely fascinated by is this Quinnipiac poll, which shows Joe Biden with a 6-point lead over Donald Trump in a likely November matchup. Biden 50, Trump 44. Is this the female deficit that's hurting Trump? What's happening here? And is this one an outlier, or is there something that Trump actually needs to be worried about?
Well, Trump should be worried about bleeding women voters, particularly suburban women voters. This poll does appear to be an outlier, though. And, it was just released yesterday. And if it was conducted most recently, I'd say, well, let's look for the next round of polls to see if it's upheld. Fact is, though, that it was conducted later last week, and there have been polls out that have been conducted since, and still show a close race, a tie, or Trump ahead by 1 or 2.
Yeah, and so the other interesting thing about this, too, is that we could also be looking not at a two-way, but potentially 3 or more-way race here with independent Robert Kennedy still kicking around in the race and actually drawing, I think, a lot of support from both, interestingly, Democrats and Republicans. There's a lot of people on the right who are very interested in a lot of the things that he has to say. So that then shrinks it down to a 39-37% lead for Biden. Where does this send the Democrats? Are they going to be concerned about bleeding votes to Kennedy?
Oh, absolutely. Because on one hand, there are things that Bobby Kennedy says that are appealing to the right, particularly, the lack of trust in government and institutions. On the other hand, Bobby Kennedy, longtime successful environmental lawyer, and look, the scion of a Democratic family. So our polls are showing that Bobby Kennedy is actually drawing equally from Trump and Biden supporters.
Well, that's really, really interesting there. Now, what about Nikki Haley? Because she's still sticking around in the race, and we've got her also in another poll beating Biden by 5 points in a hypothetical head-to-head. Now, nobody seems to think that Nikki Haley is going to hang around much past South Carolina, and yet is this going to be the sort of poll that's going to create momentum for some of the people who are funding her, especially some prominent Democrats and people on the left, to keep shoveling money into that campaign as kind of a spoiler for Trump?
Well, James, all of the above. I don't see how she sustains a real campaign beyond South Carolina. The path to the nomination is closed after South Carolina. On the other hand, and I also don't see where it's good for her political future to stay in. She's alienated the MAGA movement, and as we're seeing, there isn't much of an anti-MAGA movement to create a critical mass for her. So with that said, yes, she could sustain funding by those moderate Republicans, those no labels kinds of folks that want to do some damage to Trump. But her capacity, I think, to do damage to Trump ends with South Carolina.
And how is it looking in South Carolina? What are the numbers showing us there? Is she just going to get trounced in her own home state, or will this again be one of those sort of little boomlets that maybe get created by the media?
It all depends on your definition of trounce. I don't see her, to quote another great American. I don't see. She's not going to win South Carolina. I think she probably does better than the 30 points that she's down now. I haven't seen, nor has there been, to the best of my knowledge, anything more recent in South Carolina. We will see it over the weekend for sure.
Yeah, and finally, just want to ask you about Bloomberg, which went out and looked at 7 battleground states and found that Trump has a 48% support on average among swing state voters, with Biden trailing at 42%. In some of these states, North Carolina, Nevada, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, big leads in states that he absolutely wins. Now, given, again, for our viewers in Australia, this is a state-by-state contest, surely the Trump campaign is looking at this and thinking these are some pretty strong numbers. Biden would be pretty worried. Does he have a comeback strategy in some of these places?
Well, he's going to have to. As I look at that list, Biden won every one of those states except for North Carolina. North Carolina was competitive. Those kinds of numbers really give Biden pause. So you're going to see him continue to hammer on the abortion issue. You're going to see him continue to move towards some kind of peaceful conclusion in the Israel-Gaza dispute. Whether or not that's going to be enough, I don't know. Going to try to tout better news, and there is indeed better news on the economy, and Americans are feeling better about the economy. But look, those numbers right now are pretty catastrophic.
Now, after the break, it's Only in America. But this Sunday marks the first anniversary of the train disaster at East Palestine, Ohio, which, if you'll recall, saw dozens of railway cars loaded with things like benzene and vinyl chloride and other lovely things derail, sending an apocalyptic black cloud of smoke into the air, contaminating the water, and exposing the local residents to all sorts of unbelievably toxic chemicals. Now, at the time, Joe Biden promised to visit, but somehow never found the time. Although Donald Trump, in fairness, did come by to help out soon after the disaster. You can imagine what, though, with war and mayhem and everything else, the president's been a bit busy, even though official records also indicate he's taken 130 days of holiday in the past year. But now, good news for the residents of East Palestine. Joe Biden is finally going to visit. But here's the thing. The town now, well, they don't want him. Here's what the mayor had to say.
You know, about 4 weeks ago, the East Palestine mayor released a statement about this possibly happened. The president is always welcome to our town, he said. That being said, I don't know what he would do here now. We're going on a year and nothing from the White House. The best time for him to come would be February of 2025 when he's on his book tour. Kelly Saberi of Fox Business caught up with him after the news today. Take a listen.
I wrote a letter to him about a month ago saying that, you know, I think he needed to come. And I was gracious in the letter. I think he needs to see what's going on here.
Do you still stand by that comment about the book tour?
I 100% stand by the comment about the book tour. I think that's the best time for him personally is, you know, his Joe Biden. That's the best time for Joe Biden to come.
Too little, too late, Mr. President. Only in America's next. Welcome back to the program. And now it's time for a little segment we like to call Only in America. Well, how do you defend the indefensible? You know, some of the worst crimes you can imagine. Horrors so bad that I'd spend more time warning you about them if I was to describe them than I have for in this segment. Well, it's all about advertising and public relations.
Hamas has brought us on to kind of help with their messaging. We kind of want to make them not look like terrorists.
But they are terrorists. They're more violent than ISIS.
Okay, boomer.
I got one. The word terrorist, a little icky. What if we call them freedom fighters?
Freedom fighters? Who doesn't love that?
Wait, they raped women and butchered innocent babies.
Yeah, for freedom.
Oh, I got one. You know how Hamas blatantly states their #1 goal is to kill all Jews in the name of jihad? What if we made it more of a cute little catchy slogan?
How about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
You're on fire this morning. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Seriously, guys?
Keep it rolling.
There is only one solution: Intifada revolution.
Excuse me, the Intifada was a series of violent terrorist acts committed against Israelis and Jews in the late 80s and 2000s.
No, I don't think that's what Intifada means. Does anybody know what Intifada means? I thought it's like a Mexican dish, like empanada.
Aren't Palestinians Mexican?
I think so. I think so. See, from the river to the sea, senor.
You know how Gen Z are all about that women's rights, gay rights? What if we make the terrorists the victims?
But Hamas literally kills gay people just for being gay, and women virtually have no rights in Gaza. They're monsters.
Monsters, Inc. Great movie.
Ooh. I don't know if that would work.
Colin, can you stop ethnically cleansing people's ideas, please?
Okay, Boomer, that's all the time we've got for tonight. See you next week. In the meantime, look out for yourselves and each other. Bye-bye.